Chapter 5. The Incident at Griboyedov. The antique, two-storey, cream-coloured mansion was situated on the boulevard ring in the depths of a sickly garden, separated from the path by an ornate cast-iron fence. There was a small asphalted courtyard in front of the house. In the winter-time it housed a large pile of snow with a shovel, but in the summer-time it turned into a most magnificent seating section of a summer restaurant beneath a canvas tent. The mansion was known as Griboyedov House, on the grounds that it allegedly was once owned by the aunt of the writer Alexander Sergeyevich Griboyedov. Actually, we do not know for sure whether she owned it or not. Come to think of it, Griboyedov never had any home-owning aunts. But anyway, that's what the place was called. Moreover, some Muscovite liar once said that it was on the second floor, in the round room with the columns, that the famous writer read excerpts of Woe from Wit to the selfsame aunt as she lounged on a sofa. Then again, hell knows, maybe it did happen. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that at the present time the house was owned by the very Masolit that prior to his appearance at Patriarch's Ponds was chaired by the unfortunate Mikhail Alexandrovich Berlioz. Thanks to the ever-casual members of Masolit, no one called the mansion Griboyedov House. Instead, everyone simply said Griboyedov. I spent 2 hours knocking around at Griboyedov yesterday. Well, wheedled myself a month's vacation in Yalta. Good man. Or perhaps, go and see Berlioz. He'll be available from 4 to 5 in Griboyedov. And so on. Masolit established itself in Griboyedov in the cosiest of fashions. Anyone entering Griboyedov would first involuntarily become acquainted with notices posted by various sports clubs, as well as individual and group photographs of Masolit members hanging, the photos, that is, on the walls of the staircase leading to the second floor. The very first room on this upper floor had a large sign on its doors that read, Angling Cottage Section, and right next to it was a picture of a carp snagged on a line. Something slightly less clear was written on door number 2. One day creative trips, apply with M.V. Podlochnaya. The next door bore a short but utterly incomprehensible sign, Pereligina. Thereafter the chance visitor to Griboyedov would be overwhelmed by numerous inscriptions scattered over the aunt's walnut doors. Paper queue, C. Pokliovkina. Cashier, sketch writer's personal accounts. Cutting through the longest queue that started far below in the foyer, one could see the inscription on a door that faced a fresh onslaught of people every second. Housing question. The housing question was followed by a magnificent poster depicting a cloaked horseman riding along the crest of a cliff with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Below him, a young man with a forelock, sitting on a balcony surrounded by palm trees, staring off into the distance with ever so lively eyes and holding a fountain pen. Inscription: all-inclusive writing holidays from 2 weeks, short story, novella, to 1 year, novel, trilogy. Yalta, Suksu, Borovia, Siksitsiri, Mahinjauri, Leningrad, Winter Palace. This door also had a queue, but not as excessive. A mere 150 people or so. Then, following the whimsical curves, lifts and dips of Griboyedov House, came Masolit Board. Cashiers numbers 2, 3, 4, 5. Editorial Board. Masolit Chairman. Billiard Room. Various secondary offices. And finally, the very room with the columns where the aunt enjoyed her brilliant nephew's comedy. Any visitor to Griboyedov, unless of course he was a complete dunce, would immediately realise just how well off and fortunate the members of Masolit were, and the blackest of envies would instantly begin to consume him, and he would bitterly reproach the heavens for not endowing him with literary talent, without which, naturally, one could not even dream of owning a Masolit membership pass, brown, smelling of expensive leather, with a broad golden border. It was a pass known to all of Moscow. Who would dare say a word in defence of envy? It is an emotion of the wicked kind, but we must also put ourselves in the visitor's shoes. For what he saw on the second floor was not all, and far from it. The entire bottom floor of the aunt's house was occupied by a restaurant, and what a restaurant it was! It was justly considered the best in Moscow. And not just because it took up 2 vast halls with vaulted ceilings, painted with lilac horses with Assyrian manes, not just because every table had a shaded lamp, not just because any regular man off the street could not dine there, but also because the quality of food at Griboyedov beat any other restaurant in Moscow hands down, and because this food was delivered at a very moderate, none too taxing price. Thus, there is nothing surprising in the following conversation, once overheard by the author of these most truthful words, by Griboyedov's cast-iron fence.
"Where are you dining tonight, Ambrosi?"
"Do you have to ask? Here, of course, my dear Foka. Archibald Archibaldovich whispered to me today that they have perch au naturel à la carte. Divine little thing."
"You certainly know how to live it up, Ambrosi,"
sighed Foka, a skinny, neglected man with a carbuncle on his neck, at the giant, lush-lipped, golden-haired, plump-cheeked Ambrosi the poet. "I know nothing out of the ordinary," objected Ambrosi. "I only have the perfectly natural desire to live like a human being. You'll tell me, Foka, that you can find perch at the Colosseum as well. But at the Colosseum, a portion of perch costs 13.15, whereas here it's 5.50. Furthermore, the perch at the Colosseum is 3 days old. And finally, over there you'll have absolutely no guarantee you won't get your muzzle whipped with a bunch of grapes by the first young man to burst in from Theatre Drive. No, I categorically oppose the Colosseum," thundered the gastronome Ambrosi for the entire boulevard to hear. "Don't you try to convince me, Foka."
"I'm not trying to convince you, Ambrosi,"
squealed Foka,
"but one can dine at home."
"Thank you humbly," Ambrosi trumpeted. "I can imagine your wife struggling with her tiny pot in the communal kitchen at home, trying to construct perch au naturel à la carte. Au revoir, Foka." And singing, Ambrosi headed for the tent-covered veranda. Yes, those were the days. Moscow's old-timers remember the famous Griboyedov. What are poached perch à la carte? Cheap trifles, my dear Ambrosi. What about sturgeon? Sturgeon in a silver pot, pieces of sturgeon interlaid with lobster tails and fresh caviar, and the eggs en cocotte, with mushroom puree served in little cups. Or perhaps you didn't like the thrush fillets, with truffles. Quails à la genoise, 10.50. And the jazz, and the courteous service. In July, when the whole family's off in the country, while urgent literary business keeps you in town, how about a bowl of soupe printanière, placed in the golden circle, on a pristine tablecloth, on a veranda in the shade of the grapevines? Remember, Ambrosi? I don't even need to ask. I can tell by your lips you do. What are your whitefish and your perch? What about the snipe, the jack snipe, the great snipe, the woodcock when in season, the quail, the sandpiper, the fizz of mineral water in your mouth? But enough. You grow distracted, reader. Follow me. At 10:30 on the evening, when Berlioz died on the Patriarchs, only one room was lit on Griboyedov's top floor, where 12 writers who had gathered for the meeting were languishing as they waited for Mikhail Alexandrovich. Sitting on chairs, tables, and even on 2 of the window-sills in the masser-lit boardroom, those present were suffering badly on account of the hot spell. Not a single breath of fresh air entered the open windows. Moscow was releasing the heat accumulated by day in the asphalt, and it was clear that night would bring no relief. The smell of onions floated up from the restaurant kitchen in the basement of the aunt's house. Everyone was thirsty, everyone was wound up, and everyone was angry. The novelist, Beskudnikov, a quiet, decently dressed man with attentive yet elusive eyes, took out his watch. The hands crept on to 11. Bezkudnikov tapped his finger on the dial and showed it to the neighbouring poet, Dvobratsky, who was sitting on a table and dangling his rubber-soled yellow shoes in boredom. "Really now," grumbled Dvobratsky. "Lad must have gotten stuck on the Kleasma," came the thick voice of Natasya Lukinishna Nepremyonova. Orphaned daughter of a Moscow merchant, she became a writer and now composed naval battle tales under the pen name Skipper George.
"Excuse me,"
the popular sketch writer Zagrivov began boldly.
"Right now, I'd much rather be sipping some tea on the balcony instead of boiling in here. The meeting was scheduled for 10, wasn't it?"
"Very nice right now on the Kleasma," Skipper George egged on, knowing that the writer's cottage colony of Pereligina on the Kleasma River was a sore point for everyone. "Nightingales must be out singing by now. I always find it easier to work in the country, especially in springtime. It's the third year now that I'm making payments to send my sick wife to that heaven, but somehow nothing ever floats my way," said the novelist Jeronim Poprikin with bitter venom. "Some get lucky, some don't," droned the critic Ababkov from the windowsill. Skipper George's beady eyes lit up with delight as she gloated, softening her contralto voice. "Let's not get jealous, folks. There are only 22 cottages, and they're only building 7 more, whereas there are 3,000 of us here in Masolit."
3,111,
someone put in from the corner. "You see," continued the skipper, "what can we do? Naturally, the more talented of us receive the cottages." "Yeah, the generals," cut in Gluharioff, the scenarist joining the squabble. Yawning artificially, Bezkudnikov left the room. "5 rooms in Pereligina for 1 man," Gluharioff called after him. "Lavrovich has 6, cried Deniskin, "and an oak-panelled dining room." "Buh, right now that's not the problem," droned Ababkov. "The problem is that it's 11:30. A din arose, and a rebellion of sorts was brewing. They started to call the loathsome Pereligina, got the wrong number, Lavrovich's, and discovered that Lavrovich had left for the river, which made them even more upset. They randomly called the Commission of Fine Literature at extension number 930, and of course found no one there. "He could have called," shouted Deniskin, Gluharioff, and Quant. Alas, their cries were in vain. Mikhail Alexandrovich could no longer call anybody. Far, far away from Griboyedov, in a giant room lit by 1,000-watt bulbs, there lay on 3 zinc tables what had so recently been Mikhail Alexandrovich. On the first, a naked body caked in dry blood, with a broken arm and crushed ribcage. On the second, a head with missing front teeth and cloudy, wide-open eyes that no longer feared the blinding light. On the last, a pile of crusty rags. By the beheaded corpse stood a professor of forensic medicine, a pathological anatomist and his dissector, representatives of the investigation, and Mikhail Alexandrovich Berlioz's assistant director, the writer Zildibin, summoned by telephone from a sick wife's bedside. The car picked up Zildibin and first took him and the investigators to the victim's apartment to seal his papers. This was around midnight. Only then did they all head to the morgue. Those standing by the remains of the deceased were now conferring on whether it was best to sew the severed head to the stump of the neck, or simply to wrap the body tightly to the chin in black cloth and thus lay it out in the Griboyedov hall. Yes, Mikhail Alexandrovich could not call anybody, and all the protesting and shouting done by Deniskin, Gluharioff, Quant, and Bezkudnikov was completely pointless. Exactly at midnight, all 12 writers left the top floor and descended to the restaurant. Here they again silently cursed Mikhail Alexandrovich. Naturally, all the tables on the veranda had already been taken, and they would have to eat in the pretty but stuffy inner halls. And exactly at midnight, something boomed, rang, spilled, and jumped in the first of these halls. Immediately, a high-pitched male voice screamed desperately to the music, "Hallelujah!" The famous Griboyedov jazz band had struck up. The sweaty faces seemed to glow. The painted horses on the ceiling seemed to come alive. The lamps seemed to spill more light. And suddenly both halls burst into dance, as if unleashed, along with the veranda. Gluharioff danced off with the poetess Tamara Half-Moon. Quant danced. The novelist Zhukopov danced with some film star in a yellow dress. Dragunsky danced. Cherdakchi danced. The tiny Deniskin danced with the gigantic Skipper George. The gorgeous architect Shmekenagul danced, gripped firmly by some stranger in white canvas pants. The locals and the guests danced, the Muscovites and the visitors, the writer Johann from Kronstadt, some guy named Vitaly Kowoftik with a purple blemish all over his cheek, apparently a stage director from Rostov. The leading representatives of Masolit's poetry sub-department danced, namely Pavianov, Bogohulsky, Sladsky, Spichkin, and Adelphina Bowodzdiak. Several young men of unknown occupation danced, sporting crew cuts and shoulder pads. Some very old man with a piece of onion stuck in his beard danced, and with him a sickly anaemic elderly girl in a wrinkled dress of orange silk. Sweating profusely, waiters carried frosty beer steins over people's heads, shouting hoarsely and hatefully, "Pardon me, sir!" Somewhere a voice commanded through a loudspeaker, "1 kaski shish kebab, 2 zubrovkas, home-style tripe." The high-pitched voice no longer sang but howled, "Hallelujah!" Slamming cymbals rose occasionally over the deafening clatter of dishes lowered by dishwashers into the kitchen via an incline. In short, pure hell. And, come midnight, hell produced a vision. A handsome, dark-eyed man, in a tailcoat, with a dagger-like beard, came onto the veranda and cast a regal gaze over his domain. Mystics speak of a time when it was not a tailcoat the man wore, but a broad leather belt with pistol butts sticking out. When crimson silk was tied round his raven-black hair, and when there sailed on the Caribbean seas a brig under his command, bearing a deadly black flag with skull and crossbones. But no, the mystic enchanters lie, for there are no Caribbean seas in the world. No hot-headed buccaneers to sail upon them, no corvettes to give chase, no cannon smoke to drift over the waves. There isn't any of that, nor has there ever been. The sickly linden over there, that exists, and the cast-iron gate, and beyond it the boulevard, and the ice melts in the bowl, and someone's bloodshot, bovine eyes glare from the neighbouring table, and it is all so horrible. Horrible! Oh, gods, ye gods of mine, give me poison. Poison. Suddenly, a name came up at one of the tables. Berlioz! The jazz fell apart and fell silent, as if struck by a fist. What? Berlioz! And up they went, clamouring. Yes. A wave of grief rose at the terrible news about Mikhail Alexandrovich. Someone very agitated insisted that everyone must immediately, right here, right now, without moving an inch, compose some sort of collective telegram and send it off at once. But what sort of telegram, we ask? And where to? And why send it? And again, where? And how could a telegram be of any use to him whose crushed nape is even now being squeezed by the dissector's rubbery hands, whose neck is even now being stabbed by the professor's crooked needles? He is dead, and he doesn't need any telegrams. It is all over. Let us burden the telegraph no more. Yes, he is dead, quite dead, but we are still alive. True, there rose a wave of grief and held a while, but then it began to recede. A few here and there returned to their tables, and, covertly at first, and then quite openly, had a sip of vodka and a bite to eat. After all, why waste the chicken cutlets de volaille? How will that help Mikhail Alexandrovich? By keeping us hungry? We are still alive, after all. Now, The piano was locked up, of course, the band dismissed, and several journalists left for their offices to compose obituaries. Word was out that Zeldibin had returned from the morgue. He situated himself in the deceased man's office upstairs, which immediately started a rumour that he would be the one to succeed Berlioz. Zeldibin summoned all 12 members of the management board from the restaurant, and the urgent meeting in Berlioz's office began with the discussion of pressing questions on decorating the colonnaded Griboyedov Hall, on transporting the body from the morgue to this hall, on access to the body, and on other issues relating to the heartbreaking event. Meanwhile, the restaurant returned to nightly business as usual. It would have carried on thus till closing time, or 4 o'clock in the morning, had there not transpired something completely bizarre, something that shocked the patrons far more than the news of Berlioz's death. The first to notice were the cabbies waiting outside Griboyedov's gates. Rising in his seat, one of them could be heard shouting, "Whoa, just look at that!" Then out of nowhere, a tiny light flickered into existence by the cast-iron fence and began to approach the veranda. Rising at their tables and peering into the distance, the patrons witnessed a white apparition marching on the restaurant along with the light. As it approached the trellis, everybody froze, with eyes wide open and pieces of sturgeon still on their forks. The doorman, who had stepped outside from the cloakroom for a smoke, stamped out his cigarette and made to block the apparition from entering the restaurant. But for some reason he failed to follow through and stopped, grinning stupidly. Passing through the trellis, the unhindered apparition stepped onto the veranda. Everyone now saw that it was not an apparition at all, but the famous poet, Ivan Nikolaevich Homeless. He was barefoot, in striped white long johns, and a faded paper icon of some unknown saint was affixed by a safety pin to his torn white shirt. In his hand, Ivan Nikolaevich was carrying a lit church candle. His right cheek was freshly bruised. It would have been difficult to measure the depth of the silence that fell on the veranda. Beer poured from a tilted stein in the hands of a waiter. The poet raised the candle above his head and said loudly, "Greetings, friends!" He then looked under the nearest table and exclaimed miserably, "No, he's not there." 2 voices came. A merciless bass said, "Done deal, delirium tremens." A second frightened female voice spoke, "How did the police let him walk around in that outfit?" Ivan Nikolaevich heard the second comment and explained, "Tried to stop me twice, once on Skatyerny and once here on Bronire, except I jumped a fence and scratched my cheek." Here Ivan Nikolaevich raised his candle and cried out, "Brothers in literature!" His hoarse voice grew stronger and more passionate. "Hear me all, for he has come. Catch him immediately, or he will cause untold trouble." "What? What? What did he say? Who has come?" came voices from every direction. "The consultant," Ivan replied. "And this consultant has just murdered Misha Berlioz on the Patriarchs." At this, everyone poured out from the inner halls onto the veranda, forming a crowd round Ivan's flame. Excuse me, could you explain that?" A quiet, polite voice spoke into Ivan's ear. "Could you tell us who murdered him? Who?" "A foreign consultant, a professor and a spy," Ivan replied, gazing round. "What's his name?" the voice in his ear asked softly. "That's the thing, the name!" Ivan cried miserably. "If only I knew the name! I couldn't make it out on the business card. I just remembered the W, the name. It starts with a W. What was that name with a W?" Ivan asked himself, grasping his forehead and muttering, Vashna, Wagner,
Weine, Wegner, weg der Winter.
The hair on Ivan's head began to crawl with strain. Wolf! Some woman cried piteously. Ivan grew angry.
Idiot!
He cried, searching out the speaker with his eyes.
What's Wolf got to do with it? Wolf didn't do anything. Wo! No! I just can't remember like this. Listen, folks, call the police at once. Tell them to send 5 motorcycles equipped with machine guns to catch the professor. Oh, and don't forget to mention there are 2 others with him. Some tall, checkered guy, cracked pince-nez, and this fat black cat. In the meantime, I'll search Griboyedov. I can sense it. He's here.
Ivan grew anxious, pushed aside the onlookers, and began to wave his candle around, looking under the tables and spilling wax on himself. Then someone said, "We need a doctor." And a gentle, plump, fleshy, clean-shaven face in horn-rimmed glasses appeared before Ivan. "Comrade Homeless," the face began in a podium voice, "please calm down. You're upset by the death of everyone's beloved Mikhail Alexandrovich. No, let me simply say, Misha Berlioz. We understand perfectly. You need rest. Your friends will see you to bed, and you'll forget."
"Listen,"
Ivan interrupted, baring his teeth.
"We need to catch the professor. Don't you get it? And instead you go pestering me with this nonsense, you cretin."
"Comrade Homeless, I beg your pardon," said the face, reddening and retreating, already regretting it ever got involved in this mess.
"No,"
said Ivan Nikolaevich with quiet hatred.
"You, of all people, I have no intention to pardon."
A spasm distorted his face as he quickly transferred the candle from right hand to left, took a broad swing, and hit the sympathetic face on the ear. At this point, the onlookers had the presence of mind to throw themselves at Ivan, and throw themselves they did. The candle blew out, and the glasses that had popped off the face were instantly crushed. Ivan let out a fierce battle cry, heard to everyone's delight as far as the boulevard, and began to defend himself. Dishes clattered as they fell from tables, and women began to scream. While the waiters were tying up the poet with some napkins, the brig commander addressed the doorman in the cloakroom. "Did you see the Long Johns?" the pirate asked coldly. "Yes, Archibald Archibaldovich," the doorman answered timidly. "But how can I not let the gentleman by if he's a Masolit member?" "Did you see the Long Johns?" repeated the pirate.
"Forgive me, Archibald Archibaldovich," said the doorman, turning purple. "What could I do? I understand there are ladies on the veranda and all."
"The ladies have nothing to do with it. They don't care," answered the pirate, literally burning up the doorman with his eyes. "The police care. A man in underwear can walk the streets of Moscow in but one case. If he is being escorted by the police, and for but one destination, a police station. And as a doorman, you ought to know that if you see such a man, you must immediately sound your whistle. Can you hear?"
Scared out of his wits, the doorman heard battle yelps, the sound of dishes shattering, and women's cries from the veranda.
"What am I to do with you?"
asked the buccaneer. The doorman's skin took on a typhoid hue, and life drained from his eyes. He imagined the presently combed and parted black hair covered with fiery silk. The shirt and tailcoat vanished, and instead a pistol handle jutted out from a leather belt. The doorman pictured himself strung up on the foretop yardarm. His eyes saw his own tongue dangling from his own lifeless, drooping head, and he even heard the splashing of waves overboard. The doorman's knees buckled. But then the buccaneer took pity on him and extinguished his glare.
"Watch it, Nikolai. This is the last time. We wouldn't need doormen like you in this restaurant if they came free of charge. You'd be better suited to working in a church."
Having said this, the commander gave precise, quick, and clear orders.
"Get Pantelei from the bar, police, protocol, transportation to the mental clinic." And he added, "Blow your whistle."
In a quarter of an hour, amazed onlookers had gathered not only in the restaurant, but also on the boulevard, and in house windows facing the garden, watching Panteley, the doorman, a policeman, a waiter, and the poet Ruekin as they left Griboyedov's gates, carrying a young man who was swaddled like a mummy and weeping uncontrollably. Choking on his tears, the young man kept spitting, trying especially hard to hit Ruekin, and screaming, "Bastard!" The mean-faced truck driver started his engine. A cabby was warming up his horse nearby, thrashing it with violent rein, shouting, "Try this racer! I've driven to the clinic before!" The crowd buzzed all around, discussing the extraordinary occurrence. In other words, it was a filthy, repugnant, swinish, tempting scandal, which ended only when the truck left Griboyedov's gates, carrying the unfortunate Ivan Nikolaevich, the policeman, Panteley, and Ruekin. Chapter 6. Schizophrenia, as described. It was 1:30 in the morning when a man with a pointed beard, draped in a white coat, entered the examining room of the famous psychiatric clinic built recently on the outskirts of Moscow by the riverbank. Inside, 3 orderlies had their eyes glued to Ivan Nikolaevich, who was sitting on a couch. A very agitated poet, Ruekin, sat nearby. The napkins used to bind Ivan Nikolaevich lay in a pile on the same couch. Ivan Nikolaevich's arms and legs were free. Seeing the man enter, Ruekin grew pale, coughed, and said timidly, "Hello, doctor." The doctor bowed to Ruekin, looking, however, at Ivan Nikolaevich. The latter sat perfectly still, his face angry and his eyebrows furled, without batting an eyelid at the doctor's appearance. "Here, doctor," Ruekin began, whispering clandestinely for some reason, and glancing nervously at Ivan Nikolaevich. "Ivan homeless, a famous poet, you see. We're afraid it might be delirium tremens." "Is he a heavy drinker?" the doctor asked through his teeth. "No, he's been known to have a few, but nowhere near enough to—" "Has he tried to chase imaginary cockroaches, rats, little devils, or jumping dogs?" "No," replied Ruekin, shuddering. I saw him yesterday and also this morning. He seemed perfectly healthy." "Why the long johns, brought here straight from bed?" "He came to the restaurant like this, doctor." Uh-huh, said the doctor, very satisfied. "Why the bruises? Did he get in a fight?" "He jumped a fence and then hit this one guy in the restaurant, and then a few more." Right, said the doctor, and turning to Ivan, added, "Hello." "Greetings, wrecker," Ivan replied loudly and angrily. Ruekin was so embarrassed that he dared not even look at the polite doctor, but the latter was not at all offended. Instead, he took off his glasses, with a deft and familiar motion, and lifting his coat, concealed them in the rear pocket of his trousers. Then he asked Ivan, "How old are you?" "Would you all go to hell already?" Ivan shouted rudely and turned away. "Why are you angry? Have I said anything unpleasant?" "I'm 23 years old," Ivan said impatiently, "and I'm going to file complaints on all of you. You especially, parasite." He addressed Ruekin in particular. "And what is it you intend to complain about?" "The fact that I, an absolutely normal person, have been snatched and dragged forcibly to the madhouse," Ivan replied wrathfully. Ruekin looked more carefully at Ivan and felt a chill. There was not a trace of insanity in the man's eyes. No longer clouded, as they had been at Griboyedov, they regained their old clarity. "Goodness gracious," Ruekin thought anxiously. "He's completely normal. What nonsense. Why did we drag him out here, really? Sane. Just got his face scratched up is all." "You are not in a madhouse," the doctor informed calmly, sitting down on a white stool mounted on a shiny metal foot. "You are at a clinic where no one will detain you without need." Ivan Nikolaevich glanced at him suspiciously, but none the less muttered, "Thank God.
Finally, a single normal person among all these idiots, the chief one being this hack Sashka.
Who is this Sashka hack? Inquired the doctor.
This one, Ruekin,
Ivan replied, shoving his dirty finger in Ruekin's direction. The latter lit up with indignation. That's my thanks, he thought bitterly. That's for showing compassion. What a piece of garbage.
A typical kulak mentality, spoke Ivan Nikolaevich, evidently bent on denouncing Ruekin. And trying to masquerade as a proletariat, no less. Look at his bland expression, and see if you can juxtapose it with the loud rhymes he wrote for May Day. Rise up and unfold. Take a look inside him, see what he thinks. You'd gasp.
Ivan Nikolaevich laughed sinisterly. The red-faced Ruekin breathed heavily and thought only of how he had warmed a serpent on his bosom, how he had tried to help someone who turned out to be a malicious enemy. Worst of all, there was nothing he could do. Who would squabble with a mental patient? So why were you brought here exactly? Asked the doctor, having listened carefully to Homeless's accusations.
Oh, damn the blockheads to hell! Grabbed me, tied me up with some rags, and hauled me off in a truck.
Then let me ask you why you wore underwear to the restaurant.
Nothing out of the ordinary here, Ivan replied. I went for a swim in the Moscow River, and someone made off with my clothes and left me these rags. What, was I supposed to run round Moscow naked? I put them on because I was in a hurry to get to Griboyedov's restaurant.
The doctor looked inquisitively at Ruekin, who muttered grimly, That's what the restaurant is called. I see, said the doctor. And why were you in such a hurry? Some business meeting?
I'm hunting this consultant,
replied Ivan Nikolaevich, glancing round anxiously. What consultant?
Do you know Berlioz?
Ivan asked meaningfully. The composer? Ivan became upset.
What composer? Oh, yeah, no, the composer has the same name as Misha Berlioz.
Ruekin had no desire to say anything, but was forced to explain. The Secretary-General of Masserit, Berlioz, was run over by a tram today on the Patriarchs.
Shut up! What do you know?
Ivan snapped at Ruekin.
I was there, not you. He intentionally set him up for the tram.
Pushed him?
What's push got to do with it?
Exclaimed Ivan, annoyed at the general obtuseness.
No one needed to push anyone. The things he can cook up, you'd best hold on to your hat. He knew in advance that Berlioz would fall under the tram.
Has anyone besides you seen this consultant?
That's the problem. Only Berlioz and I.
Right. So what measures did you take to apprehend this killer? Here the doctor turned and cast a glance at a woman in a white coat, who was sitting behind a desk off to the side. She took out a form and began to fill in the blanks.
Here's what measures. First I took a candle from the kitchen.
This one? Asked the doctor, pointing to a broken candle lying on the woman's desk next to the icon.
That's the one, and
why the icon?
The icon, well...
Ivan blushed.
The icon was the thing that got them so worked up.
Again he thrust his finger at Ruekin.
But the thing is that this consultant, to put it frankly, he's mixed up with evil spirits. You can't catch him just like that.
For some reason the orderlies straightened up and fixed their eyes on Ivan.
Oh, yes, Ivan continued. Mixed up with them, all right. That's one incontrovertible fact. He personally spoke with Pontius Pilate. No need to stare at me. It's all true. He saw everything, the balcony, the palms. He's been to Pontius Pilate's. I vouch for it.
Well, well.
So, as it were, I pinned the icon to my chest and ran.
Suddenly the clock struck twice.
Hey!
Ivan exclaimed, rising from the couch.
It's already 2. I'm losing time here. Excuse me, where's the phone?
Let him use the phone, the doctor commanded to the orderlies. Ivan grasped the receiver, while the woman asked Ruekin quietly, Is he married? Single, Ruekin answered fearfully. Union member? Yes.
Police!
Ivan shouted into the receiver.
Police! Whoever's on duty, please dispatch 5 motorcycles with machine guns to capture a foreign consultant. What? Drop by here, I'll come with you. I'm homeless, a poet. I'm in the madhouse. What's your address?
Homeless whispered to the doctor, covering the receiver with his hand, then shouted at the phone again.
"Are you listening? Hello? Unbelievable!"
He howled suddenly and flung the receiver at the wall. He then turned to the doctor, offered his hand, bid him goodbye dryly, and turned to leave. "Forgive me, but where is it you want to go?" spoke the doctor, peering into Ivan's eyes. "So late at night, in your underwear. You don't seem to be feeling too well. Stay with us a while."
"Let me through,"
Ivan said to the orderlies, blocking the door.
"Are you going to let me through or not?"
the poet cried in a fearsome voice. Ruekin trembled, and the woman pressed a button on her desk, causing a shiny box and a sealed bottle to pop out onto its glass surface.
"Oh, yeah,"
Ivan said, glancing round wildly like cornered prey.
"All right, then. Farewell."
And he dived, head first at the window curtains. The impact was resounding, but the shatterproof glass behind the curtains held, and moments later Ivan was struggling in the hands of the orderlies. He rasped, trying to bite them, and screamed,
"Nice glass you've got yourselves around here! Let go! Let go, I said!"
A syringe flashed in the doctor's hand, and the woman sliced open the frail sleeve of Ivan's shirt with a single stroke, latching onto the arm with unwomanly strength. The air began to smell of ether. Ivan went limp in the hands of the four men, and the doctor deftly seized this opportunity to jab the needle into his arm. They held Ivan for several more seconds, and then lowered him onto the couch.
"Bandits!"
Ivan cried, and leapt up from the couch, but was immediately returned to his seat. As soon as he was let go, he jumped up again, but this time sat back down on his own. He was silent for a moment, gazing round savagely, then unexpectedly yawned and smiled spitefully.
"Oh, locking me up after all,"
he said, yawning again, and then lay down suddenly, placing his head on the pillow and sticking his fist under his cheek like a child. He kept muttering a while longer, his voice already sleepy and calm. "Very well, then. You'll be the ones regretting it. I warned you. So do as you will. As for me, I'm much more interested in Pontius Pilate right now. Pilate." And he closed his eyes. "Bath him. Put him in the number 117 single, and keep an eye on him," ordered the doctor, replacing his glasses. Ruekin shuddered again. The white doors slid noiselessly open, revealing a hallway lit by blue night lights. A stretcher rolled out from the hallway on rubber wheels. The pacified Ivan was transferred to it and carted off down the hallway, the doors closing behind him. "Doctor," Ruekin whispered in shock. "Is he really sick, then?" "Oh, yes," said the doctor. "What's wrong with him?" Ruekin asked timidly. The tired doctor glanced at Ruekin and said wearily, "Overexcitation of motor and speech functions. Delirious interpretations. Looks like a complex case. Schizophrenia, I would assume, and the alcoholism as well." From the doctor's words, Ruekin understood only that Ivan Nikolaevich was apparently not too well. He sighed and asked, what was all that consultant business he kept bringing up? He probably saw someone who struck his troubled imagination, or perhaps he was hallucinating. Several minutes later, the truck was carrying Ruekin back to Moscow. Dawn was approaching, and the light from lampposts still glowing along the side of the road was now unnecessary and unpleasant. The driver was angry on account of a wasted night and pushed the truck as fast as it would go, making it skid on the turns. The forest tapered off, vanishing behind them, and the river veered sideways. A multitude of objects now poured past the truck. Fences with sentry booths, stacks of wood, tall posts, masts with spools of wire, heaps of rubble, canals etching through the land. In short, you could feel Moscow approaching, right around the corner, about to leap out and swallow you. Ruekin was tossed and jerked in the back, and the stump of wood he was sitting on kept trying to slip out from underneath him. The restaurant napkins rolled all over the truck bed, thrown there by Panteley and the policeman who had left earlier. Ruekin tried to gather them up, but then hissed maliciously. To hell with them. Why should I crawl around here like an idiot? He pushed them aside with his foot and looked away. The passengers' spirits were terribly low. It became clear that his visit to the asylum had left an extremely unpleasant mark. Ruekin tried to understand what tormented him so. The hallway with blue lights stuck in his memory. The thought that nothing could be worse than losing one's mind. Yes, they certainly had a part in it, but they were merely general observations. There was something else. What was it? The insult. That's what. Yes, the insulting words that Homeless had hurled right in his face. And it was not their hurtful tone that made them so bad, but the fact that they were true. No longer looking up and staring only at the filthy vibrating floor, the poet muttered, whined, and gnawed at himself. The poetry. He was 32 years old. So what now? Really? Now he would continue to write several poems a year? Till he grew old? Yes, till he grew old. What will these poems bring him? Fame? What rubbish! At least don't try to deceive yourself. Fame will never come to one who writes bad poetry. Then what makes it so bad? The truth. He spoke the truth. Ruekin badgered himself mercilessly. I don't believe in a single word I write. The poet swayed, envenomed by his inner breakdown, and then the floor underneath him stopped shaking. Ruekin raised his head and saw that he was already in Moscow, and furthermore that dawn had broken over the city, that the clouds were lit from underneath with gold, that the truck had stopped, stuck in a column of traffic by the boulevard turn, and that directly opposite him a metal man stood on a pedestal, tilting his head slightly and staring indifferently at the street. Strange thoughts flooded the afflicted poet's head. Now here's an example of true luck. Ruekin stood up on the truck's platform and raised his hand, attacking the completely harmless Iron Man. No matter where he went in life, no matter what happened to him, everything went his way, everything turned to fame. But what has he actually done? I can't grasp it. What's so special about those words? Storm has set the sky in shadow. I don't understand. Luck, dumb luck, Ruekin concluded bitterly, and felt the truck move underneath him. That white guardsman shot him and smashed his hip and assured him immortality. The column of traffic budged. Feeling completely ill and very old, the poet stepped on to the Griboyedov veranda not 2 minutes later. It was already empty. A group was finishing drinks in the corner, a familiar MC fussing around in its midst, wearing a skull cap and holding a glass of Abrau in his hand. Burdened with napkins, Ruekin was very warmly met by Archibald Archibaldovich, and instantly relieved of the cursed rags. Were Ruekin not so torn up by the clinic visit and the truck ride, he probably would have relished recounting all that took place in the hospital and embellishing his story with fictional details. But right now he had other things on his mind. Moreover, oblivious though Ruekin was, the torture he experienced on the truck made him look carefully into the pirate's face for the first time. He saw that although the man was asking about Homeless and even exclaiming, "Oh my," he was actually quite indifferent to Homeless's fate and did not pity him in the least. And good for him. That's the way to be, thought Ruekin, consumed by cynical, self-destructive hatred. He cut short his tale of schizophrenia and said, Archibald Archibaldovich, perhaps a sip of vodka. The pirate put on a sympathetic face and whispered, Understood, right this minute, and waved to a waiter. 15 minutes later, Ruekin hunched over a plate of fish in complete solitude, downing shot after shot, realizing and admitting that nothing in his life could be fixed any more, but only forgotten. The poet had wasted his night while others celebrated, and knew now that he could not bring it back. He needed but to raise his head from the lamp to the sky to see that the night had irreversibly gone. The waiters hurriedly tore the tablecloths off the tables. The cats, sneaking by the veranda, had a distinctly morning look. Daytime advanced relentlessly on the poet. Chapter 7. A Fishy Apartment. If someone had told Styopa Likodiev the next morning, "Styopa, get up this instant or you'll be shot," Styopa would have said, in a languid, barely audible voice,
"Shoot me, do whatever you want with me, but I'm not getting up."
Forget getting up. It seemed to him that he could not even open his eyes, for the moment he did, a lightning bolt would smash his head to pieces. Giant bells rang in his head. Brown blobs with fiery green rims floated between his eyeballs and closed lids, and topping it all was a feeling of nausea, seemingly connected to the sound of some really annoying gramophone. Styopa tried to remember what had happened, but only one memory sprang to mind. Yesterday he had apparently stood in an unknown location, holding a napkin, and trying to kiss some lady, whom he promised to visit the next day exactly at noon. The lady protested, saying, No, I won't be home," while Styopa insisted firmly, "Well, I will be there anyway." The identity of the lady, and for that matter, the current time, date and month, were a mystery to Styopa. Worst of all, he could not tell where he was. Trying to at least establish the latter, he peeled open his stuck left eyelid. Something glowed dimly in the shadows. Styopa finally recognized the object as the dresser mirror, and realized that he was lying flat on his bed, the jeweller's wife's former bed, in the bedroom. Then his head was struck by a jolt of pain so powerful that he shut his eye and moaned. Let us explain. Styopa Likodiev, director of the Variety Theatre, awakened that morning in his own apartment, which he happened to share with the deceased Berlioz, in a large, 6-story, U-shaped building on Sadovaya Street. It should be noted that this apartment, number 50, had long had a bad, or at least odd, reputation. A mere 2 years ago, it was owned by the jeweller de Fougeret's widow, Anna Franchevna de Fougeret, a respectable and very practical 50-year-old lady, leased 3 of her 5 rooms to tenants, one apparently named Belomut, and another whose name has been lost. And then 2 years ago, inexplicable phenomena began to occur in the apartment. Its residents began disappearing without trace. One weekend, a policeman showed up at the apartment and called a tenant, the one whose name has been lost, to the hall, asking him to drop by the police station for a few minutes to sign something or other. The tenant ordered Anfise, Anna Franchevna's long-time and devoted housekeeper, to tell anyone who called that he would be back in 10 minutes, and then left together with the respectful, white-gloved policeman. However, he did not return in the next 10 minutes, or, for that matter, ever. Most surprisingly, the policeman seemingly disappeared along with him. The God-fearing, or, to put it frankly, superstitious Anfise told a very upset Anna Franchevna straight out that witchcraft was to blame, and that she knew full well who had snatched the tenant and the policeman, only she did not wish to speak his name this close to night-time. Now, it is well known that witchcraft need but begin, and then nothing can stop it. The tenant disappeared around Monday. On Wednesday, Bellamut also vanished from the face of the earth, though under different circumstances. In the morning, the company car arrived as usual to take him to work, and take him it did, but it neither brought anyone back nor returned itself. Madame Bellamut's horror and grief defied description, but alas, both sentiments were short-lived. On the same night, upon returning from the countryside, where she had urgently needed to go with Anfise for some reason, Anna Franchevna did not find Mrs. Bellamut in the apartment. What's more, the doors of both rooms occupied by the Bellamut couple had been sealed. 2 days passed. On the third day, Anna Franchevna, afflicted throughout all this by insomnia, again departed hastily for the countryside. Needless to say, she did not return. Left alone, and Fiche cried her fill and went to bed some time after 1 in the morning. What happened to her then is unknown, though neighbours would later say that all through the night a mysterious tapping emanated from the fully lit number 50. In the morning, they discovered that Anfiche was gone as well. For a long time, various legends about the disappearances and the cursed apartment abounded in the building, such as, for example, that the dried-up, God-fearing Anfiche had carried on her dried-up chest a suede bag containing 25 large diamonds belonging to Anna Franchevna, that in a wooden shed in the country, where Anna Franchevna had so speedily gone, untold treasures came to be discovered, including the aforementioned diamonds and gold coins from the Tsar's mint, and so on like that. Well, what we don't know, we can't vouch for. Anyway, the apartment remained sealed and empty for only a week, whereupon it was occupied by the late Berlioz with his spouse and this Stiopa fellow, also with a spouse. Naturally, as soon as they happened upon the wicked apartment, all hell broke loose. For starters, both of their spouses disappeared in the space of 1 month, albeit this time not without a trace. Berlioz's spouse was apparently seen in Kharkov with some ballet master, while Stiopa's surfaced on Pozhedomka Street. It was rumoured that the Varieties director, using his countless connections, had managed to get her a separate apartment, on the condition that she never show her face on Sadovaya again. And so Stiopa moaned. He contemplated calling Grunia, the housekeeper, and demanding an aspirin, but managed to realise this made no sense. Grunia, of course, would have nothing of the sort. He tried calling Berlioz for help, and twice moaned, "Misha, Misha," but, as you can imagine, received no reply. The apartment was perfectly silent. Wiggling his toes, Stiopa deduced that he was wearing socks. He passed his shaking hand over his hip to determine if he was wearing trousers, and failed to reach a conclusion. At last, realising that he was abandoned and alone, with no one to help him, Stiopa decided to get up, no matter what superhuman feats it might require. Stiopa unstuck his fused eyelids and saw himself reflected in the mirror as a man wearing a dirty collared shirt and tie, as well as long johns and socks. His hair was sticking every which way, his eyes were swollen, and his bloated face was covered with black stubble. Such was the image he saw in the mirror, and next to the mirror he saw an unknown man, all dressed in black and sporting a black beret. Stiopa sat down on his bed, and his bloodshot eyes popped out at the stranger as far as they could go. The stranger was first to break the silence, pronouncing the following words in a low, heavy voice and with a foreign accent. "Good day, my dearest Stefan Bogdanovich." There was a pause, after which Stiopa said with terrible effort, "What do you want?" and was amazed at how unrecognisable his voice had become. He said, "What?" in falsetto, "Do you?" in bass, and "want" did not emerge at all. The stranger smiled amicably, and took out a large gold watch with a diamond triangle on the lid. He let it ring 11 times, and said, 11. For exactly 1 hour I have been waiting for you to wake up, as you had scheduled our appointment for 10. So here I am. Stiopa felt for his trousers on the chair next to the bed, and whispered, "Excuse me." He put them on, and asked hoarsely, "Could you please tell me your name?" It was very difficult to talk. Every word was a needle piercing his brain, causing infernal pain. "What? You've forgotten my name, too?" The stranger smiled. "Forgive me." Stiopa rasped, experiencing new gifts from his hangover. He now felt as if the floor underneath him had collapsed, and he was about to plummet headfirst into the devil's den in the netherworld. "Dear Stefan Bogdanovich," the visitor began, smiling astutely, "all the aspirin in the world won't help you. Follow the wise old rule. Treat like with like. The only thing that can bring you back to life is 2 shots of vodka with something hot and spicy to follow." Stiopa was a cunning man. No matter how sick, he understood that since he had been caught with his pants down, he had better confess to everything. "To tell you the truth," he began, barely moving his tongue, "yesterday I had a little—" "Not a word more," the visitor replied, and slid aside on his chair. His eyes bulging, Stiopa saw a tray served on a small table. It contained sliced white bread, pressed caviar in a tiny bowl, pickled white mushrooms on a saucer, something in a little pot, and finally vodka, in a spacious decanter belonging to the jeweller's wife. Stiopa was especially amazed by the fact that the decanter was foggy from the cold. This was to be expected, however, for it sat in a bowl packed full of ice. In other words, everything was served up neatly and skilfully. The stranger prevented Stiopa's astonishment from reaching painful proportions by deftly pouring him half a shot of vodka. "And you?" squeaked Stiopa. "With pleasure." Stiopa raised the glass to his mouth with a quivering hand, while the stranger downed his own shot in a single gulp. Chewing on some caviar, Stiopa squeezed out the words, "What about you? A bite to eat?" "Many thanks, but I never snack with my liquor," the stranger replied and poured a second shot. They opened the pot, revealing frankfurters in tomato sauce. The accursed green blobs dissolved before his eyes. Words began to come out more easily, and, most importantly, Stiopa remembered a few things. More specifically, that he had been in Shodnia yesterday, at a cottage belonging to the sketch-writer Hustov, who had him delivered there in a taxi. He even recalled how they had hired the cab by the Metropole, with that actor? Or maybe he wasn't an actor. He had a portable gramophone. Yes, it was at the cottage. Even the dogs were howling at the sound of that gramophone. Only the lady Stiopa had tried to kiss remained unexplained. Hell knew who she was. Possibly worked in radio, or maybe not. In this fashion, the previous day cleared up gradually. Right now, however, Stiopa was far more interested in the present day, and particularly in the appearance of a stranger in his bedroom, with vodka and snacks no less. That's what would be mighty nice to clear up.